Hello everyone and welcome to the second video of the Excel Advanced course. So what we're looking at in this topic is the types of lookup functions in Excel. So there's a few different options and a few different formulas, so we'll go through each of these. And the first thing is understanding which formula should we use in the right situation. Now, the most common problem that you may be aware of, you may not be, is the difference between a VLOOKUP and an index match. Now, most people at this level are familiar with the VLOOKUP. They know how to do it. Most people are familiar with the index match. Some people don't know how to do the index match. Some people know how to do both, but they still use VLOOKUP out of habit because that's generally one of the first formulas that they learn in the workplace. I'm going to demonstrate to you why you need to forget the VLOOKUP formula right away and just get in the habit of only using the index match for your lookups. So, first of all, a quick recap on what the VLOOKUP formula is. It looks something like this. It's equals VLOOKUP, and then you select the lookup value that you're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for the month of February. Next, we select the table array. So we select the entire table array, including the data and the fields we're looking for. And then we choose the column index number. So in this case, it's row number 4. And what that means is within the array that you've selected, Excel is going to look 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to look in the 4th column here, and it's going to look up in the row which corresponds to this value over here, Feb. So because that's in the second one, it's going to pull this value here. And the answer is that 100 one there, so this value over here. Now, let's see what happens when we add in a row. You'll see that the Excel formula has now been disrupted. All it took was someone else opening the file and adding in a row to perhaps add in some extra data in here, and so forth. So all of a sudden, the formula no longer works because what we were looking for is this one here, but it's actually picking up this value here. So that's the most practical example as to why you need to forget the VLOOKUP. It'll work most of the time, but in certain situations it's going to break. And if you didn't know that someone had gone and entered a row, you'd think that this was the answer and you'd be relying on that even though it's wrong. So that's why we need to forget the VLOOKUP. So now let's move on to the index match, and we'll do a quick recap if you know already what it is, and if you don't know what it is, we'll walk you through how to actually produce this replacement formula. So the index match formula is actually a combination of two different formulas. So number one is the index formula, and the second formula is the match formula. So to be able to do an index match, you're actually doing two formulas at once, or you're nesting a match formula in an index formula is the correct terminology. So to be able to understand that, first we need to understand the match formula. So what does the match formula do? So the match formula looks for a value, for example, the name Alan. It looks for that value in a range assigned by the user, and it returns the row that this value is in the table. So for example, we want to look up Alan. In these 4 names, Alan is the second row in that array that we've selected here. Therefore, the position of Alan is number 2. If we had selected all of these cells, including the names header, then Alan's place is row number 3. So it's going to be dependent on the selection or the array that you've selected, which will generate the right output. So let's have a look at this example over here. So we're looking up the value 1000. So we're going to go equals match. Lookup value is the I9, so that's the 1000, and we're looking up in this array, so just those 4 numbers there, and the match type. So there's 2 different types we can do here. We can do match type 0 or match type 1. Now the difference between the two is this. It's either exact match, greater than, or less than. So generally we're just going to rely on the 0 value over here. So let's now look at the index formula. So the index formula is a way of returning a value in a cell in which we specify the array, the row number, and the column number. So basically we're going to have a list of values like this that I've selected over here, and then Excel asks us to then tell us which which column it's in. So let's say it's in column N, and it's also going to ask us to tell us which row it's in. So let's say it's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows down. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In row N, it's going to select this cell here, and it's going to return that value. So let's see that in action. We want to look up a certain value within this table over here based on the x-axis, the y-axis, the number of weeks required, so either 1, 2, or 3, and then also how many people in that party. So basically it's going to say 2 people, and then we're going to say, 2 weeks, and it's going to be 4 people, so we want to return this value over here. So let's see how this works. So the first thing is we type the index formula, so equals index. The next thing we need to do is we need to type the array. So we just select the cells in the array. So we're only going to select the values. You could select more data than that, but it just means you're going to need to adjust your row number according to how many different arrays you're selecting. So for the row number, what we want to do is we want to select number 2. We're linking into the cell over here. So in other words, we're going row number 1, row number 2. So we're telling Excel that it's in this level over here. Now you'll notice that we can't put in another value. So for example, if this was week A, B, C, we can't just type in A. It's not going to work. You actually have to type in a number. So it's row 1, 2, 3, and 4. Row 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and column 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have to actually literally tell us what number, row, and column it's in. Okay, and then the next thing is tell us which column number it's in. So it's going to go, okay, so it's in column 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically we're giving Excel a map of where to pull the data from. We're saying this is the range of data. We want you to only look in row 2, and we only want you to look in column 4. And the intersecting value is this one, therefore that's what it's going to generate. So that's the index formula. So why do we need the match formula? The match formula basically answers the problem we discussed before. What if this isn't 1, 2, and 3? What if this is A, B, and C? So here's an example here where we can apply this actual question. So we want to know whether the exam score here, the exam score by each pupil corresponds to what grade it is. So I want to basically extract, based on this 60 number, I want to extract whatever's in this column. So it can be an exact number, so we could type in 0, 50, 90, 95, or we could just put in what their actual score is, and then using the match function, it'll either select equal to, greater than, and so forth. So let's go through this formula. We're going to go index to start off with, and we're going to select our array over here, because these are the only 4 values that I want to be able to pull from. Now I'm going to lock this as well by pressing F4 on my keyboard. So the next question that I have to ask is, what row number do I want it to be? And you'll remember before, as we went through that example with the index, is that we need to either say 1, 2, 3, or 4, because that's the number of rows that are in there. So let's leave that blank for now. We'll come back to that one. And then the last thing is what column. We can also leave that blank because there's only one column, so it doesn't matter. So okay, so let's go back to the row. How do we actually figure out whether that score fits into one of these? So, well, we can use the match formula. So we can go match, and we can actually look up the score over here. And I'm going to lock the column as well. I'm going to look up that in the lookup array of these scores over here and lock that. And then the match type, we can do exact match, less than or greater than. We're just going to leave this as 0 for now, and then we'll do a sense check later. So I just had to quickly change this because that didn't work. So what I've done is I've changed the match type from 0 to 1, and that's only because the values didn't equal each other. So I've chosen the one that corresponds to greater than. So now this is working. So it's saying pass. Now I can remind you that if these scores had equal these scores, we could just leave the match type as 0. It's only because we want to know which ones are greater than, we've had to change it to 1. Now the only thing is we need to lock these. So I'm going to lock this. I'm going to lock the column here, and I'm going to lock this and enter. And now we can drag this down, and here we have the index match working. Now, remember before, if we did a VLOOKUP based on this, if I inserted a row, if this was a VLOOKUP, this would no longer work. But because it's an index match, the formula still works. So this is why we use the index match over the VLOOKUP. So now that we've gone through the index match and the VLOOKUP, we can start talking about some of the formulas such as row and rows and columns, which form the basis of those arrays and finding a specific intersection between rows and columns. Now, going back to the basics, if there's a few formulas here that I want to show you. So first of all is the row formula. So if we were to select this value that we were trying to pull out before, which is the 250 value, if we just use the row formula, this is going to tell us basically what row this is sitting in the Excel spreadsheet. And you can see that this is corresponding with the number 8 over here. So it literally tells us where this is sitting in the workbook, so we can choose any value in here. We could also combine this with, say, a lookup and pull out the X and Y axis of a particular cell or value in the worksheet. Now, the corresponding formula to this is the column. Now, this does the exact same thing. It tells us the column location of a particular cell. In this case, it's the 7th column across. So it doesn't say letters, it actually says numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because G is the 7th letter in the alphabet. Now, on top of this, there's another formula, which is rows with an S at the end and columns with an S at the end. So what this does is it tells you within an array the number of columns in there. So you can see that there's 4 columns in here, and if we replace columns with rows, it'll tell us the number of rows in this array as well. So there's 3 rows. So it's a 3 by 4 like this data set. So that now we understand the rows and columns and arrays and returning a particular value between an intersection of certain rows and arrays, we can start looking at what's called the offset function. Now, the offset function works by selecting a particular cell. Let's say this one here, M5. Now, we then tell Excel how many rows and columns we want to return a value away from this particular cell. For example, we may want to pull a value which is 2 columns away and then 3 columns down. So it's going to go 2 columns away and then 1, 2, 3. It's going to return this value over here. So if we had 100 over here and 99 over here and 99 over here, it doesn't really matter what's in this cell. If you type in equals offset 3 across, 3 down, you're going to return this value over here. So that's how the offset function works. And there's a few different uses of this. So you could combine this function with a sum. So for example, you may have different values depending on different months of the year. You may need the same data every month. For example, we want to know what the forecast is 3 months from today or this month. Or you might do it the other way around and always have the last 3 months. In which case the offset formula comes in handy, because even though these dates are always changing, because today is going to update to the current month, the offset will always, based on a specific starting point, it will always pull out the same cell, which is 3 across from it, and pull that value out. So let's have a quick example. So let's say we want to go equals offset. So our reference cell is always going to be this one here, so let's lock that. And then all we want to do is we want to select how many rows down. So the answer is 0. And how many columns across? 1, 2. So we're just going to do 2. And that's going to pull this value over here, because it's going to start off with this one and go 1, 2 across. Okay. You could also do that with a negative as well. Unfortunately, there's no values there before it. So right now we're pulling out that 10 value over here. Okay, so we can also combine the offset with a few different formulas. So we can nest it within a sum function, for example. So if we want to sum the value of, let's see, February over here. So we want to start off with our value in January. That's our reference point. Don't forget to lock this. And then we're going to put nothing in rows because we want it to be in the same row. And then columns, we want it to be 1 month across. Okay? So there's our offset formula. So the answer should be 400. Okay? But we can also combine this with a sum. So we can go sum E29 and then colon to indicate a range and then end that. So the answer there is 410. Now, what this is doing is it's saying we're not adding that to that, but what we're doing is we're adding a sum to everything in between this range. So what about if we wanted to sum this one, and this one? So it's basically next month and the month after plus a starting number, say for, last month. So we can do that again. So we can go equals offset. Let's do the offset formula first. This is our starting reference. 0 for nothing for the rows, 2 for the columns. And also notice how we've also got these other options over here. These are in square brackets, which means they're optional. So we can ignore those. Okay, so there's our offset function. So that should give us the value 500. So it's going to take us to this cell over here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go equals sum that value there, so E34. And then I'm going to put the colon in there, which indicates a range. Okay, I'm just going to delete the duplication. So we're going from offset E34. Okay, so let's say that I only want to sum these two values here. So basically, the value from all the values from 2 months out from this value here, 400. So what we're going to do is we're going to select E34. So I'm going to select all of the values from here through to here. So you'll notice another way of writing this is equal to sum of all of the values between this and this. So I'm going to hold down shift, and as you can see that it's generated a range with a semicolon. So that's basically what's happening there with the offset. So you can also combine multiple offsets in the same formula. Now the reason you might do that is because I want to sum all of these values here, but I want to do that all with reference to an original cell. So for example, I want to sum all of the cells starting from 1 to the right, which is this one here, and I want to end that range with all of the cells 3 to the right of this one. So basically, in other words, I want to sum from this one to this one, but this cell reference is dynamic, so we could move this to over here and it would sum the 3 reference to the right and so forth. So just to remind you what we're trying to achieve, so we want to sum those 3 there, so with reference to this cell here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to do our sum formula. Our first number that we want to sum is this one here, but I'm not going to click on it because I want it to be with reference to whatever this cell is here. So I'm going to select the offset function here. This is our original reference, so I'm going to lock that. And then I'm going to go row, nothing in rows, but I'm going to go 1 in the columns because I want to start with this one, 1 to the right. So there's our first one. And then I'm going to press colon to indicate the start of a range. And the next value that I want to, or reference that I want to have here is to this one over here. Oh, sorry, to this one over here. So I'm going to go another offset. So I'm going to go offset 3 from this cell. So I'm going to select this as my reference cell, nothing for rows, and 3 for to say 3 cells across from my reference cell. I'm going to end that. And now we have the sum 1500, which is effectively saying sum the range between 1 to the right of this one and to the end of 3 to the right of this cell. So in other words, the sum of that. So a little bit complicated, but it gives you a good understanding of using relative references. So it's not actually looking at one particular value, but it's looking at the cell which is an X number of rows and columns away from a certain cell. Okay, so the other way we can use relative references in a formula is using the indirect formula. So this is a formula that's often overlooked in Excel training and by Excel users, but it can be very powerful. So let's go through some examples of how we can use this. It's a similar scenario. We have an array over here, and we want to be able to retrieve a certain value. But instead of telling Excel to pull a value which is X columns to the right and X columns down from a certain cell, what we're going to do is we're actually going to tell Excel where the cell is. So we're actually going to say it's in column G6, and we want Excel to tell us what value is in column G6. So let's try this out. So the formula we want to type is indirect, and then we just select the cell reference. So in this case, G6. Now Excel is going to pull that value out. So pretty straightforward. So indirect formula can also be used to pull cells from a different tab as well, which is how most people tend to use it. So for example, we've got another tab over here called North, and we've got a data set in here. And what we want to do in this formula is pull the data from the tab called North, and we want to pull it from cell C8 in that particular tab. So the formula we're going to use is we're going to go indirect, and then the reference text is G33, which is the name of the tab, and then we're going to go and exclamation mark like this, because that's how we signify that another tab is being used, and then and G34. So the reason why we're formatting in this way is because we actually, if we link into that tab, let's say we pull out that cell there, you'll see that the tab reference up the top of the screen actually has the equals north exclamation F5, and we can follow that through just by pressing Control left shift, and Excel will take us to that particular tab. So that's why we do it like that. We're just trying to create the naming convention so that it literally says north exclamation mark. So it's a good workaround for doing that. So you can also do the indirect with a range of cells. So in this case, you just add a sum reference outside of it, and then you do an indirect with a colon in it, and just do your first cell reference, and then put a colon in between and do your second cell reference, and it will create a range which basically looks like this, equals sum south C5 to C7. So I'm not going to go into detail about this one, but hopefully we've covered off the different types of data that we can pull using lookup functions, why you should be using the indirect function over the VLOOKUP, and why you need to forget the VLOOKUP, how to use index match formula, just understanding reference functions, including how it works in Excel's mind in terms of telling it where the row is and the column is, and how we can use formulas like offset and indirect to pull out an output value using the referential location of a particular cell, for example in column 5 columns across and 4 columns down, or we can say in column G6 and pull that data out. So that's all the different kinds of lookup functions in Excel.